Hello, everyone. What a delight to be with you all this evening. It's such a pleasure. I went back and forth about whether I should do a PowerPoint presentation or not, but I had so many wonderful quotations that I wanted to share with you, and I thought you might appreciate seeing them. So I went ahead and prepared it. So let me see if I can share my screen. And okay, can you all see?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. All right, so our topic for tonight is charting the course for a lasting peace, notwithstanding the chaos and confusion of our times. I want to start with a statement by the Governing Council of the Baha'is, the Universal House of Justice, that was issued in 2019. And this statement comes from that message, this sentence. Universal peace is the destination towards which humanity has been moving throughout the ages. This is closely aligned with a statement of the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah himself, who stated that the purpose for which mortal men and human beings were born from utter nothingness was that they may work for the betterment of the world. So that's number one, working for the betterment of the world. And number two, that they would live together in concord and harmony, i.e., live together peacefully. You can't live in concord and harmony while you're in conflict and have war. So this is why we're here, to live together in peace. It's one of the two main purposes for which we were created. And it's a destination towards which we're all moving, sometimes kicking and screaming because we don't want to do the things that we need to do in order to achieve peace. And we're going to talk about those today. But this process of moving towards this destination of universal peace is not happening on its own, even though it sometimes looks like it is, nor is it happening in a haphazard way. Because the rest of the quotation is that it's happening under the influence of the word of God that is being progressively imparted over the millennia by the creator to the creation. So for those of you who are familiar with the Baha'i faith, you will remember and know that the essential Baha'i belief is that there's a loving creator who's created all of us, known by different names in different religious traditions, but the same creator. And that part of the expression of that creator's love for us is that from time to time during our historical evolution, this creator sends us a divine teacher to edify us, to teach us spiritual truths, to give us social laws that are fit for purpose for the time in which that prophet has come, and to conduce to our well-being and happiness. So this movement of the human collective throughout its history towards its destination of peace, which would represent our arriving at our maturity, is happening under the influence of the Word of God. So what does that mean, under the influence of the Word of God? So I was thinking about this. Again, I just want to have said, for those of you who have been around Baha'is, you'll know this, but for those of you who are new to the faith, know please that there are no clergy in the Baha'i faith. Authority is not vested in individuals, but in elected institutions. So all my words tonight are Soveda's understanding of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, but I would urge you to go and investigate for yourselves. And I've tried to quote directly from the Baha'i Writings so that you will see where I'm getting the thoughts and ideas from. So let's start. How is this influence coming from the Word of God? Well, the first thing that occurred to me is this idea from the Baha'i Writings in many places that with the coming of each manifestation of God or prophet of God or messenger of God, spiritual energies are released into the world. And these spiritual energies set in motion forces, Baha'u'llah says, of both integration and disintegration. Now, this is important. They set in motion both kinds of forces of integration and disintegration. And the Baha'i writings furthermore tell us that both of these processes are accelerating. And we can certainly, as we turn on the news every day, see the acceleration of the processes, definitely of disintegration, but also of integration, the solidarity that we see amongst the people of the world, the growing solidarity as they come face to face with the evidences of disintegration. Now, the purpose of both of these dual processes is to sweep away the blocks that have hindered humanity from achieving its goal, which is peace and unity. Now, I want to read this quotation to you to shore up what I'm saying. Such simultaneous processes of rise and fall, of integration and disintegration, of order and chaos, are but aspects of a greater plan, capital P, one and indivisible. So disintegration, integration, all part of a single plan, whose source is what? Who? Is God. Whose author is who? Baha'u'llah. And the theater of whose operations is the entire planet, and whose ultimate objectives are the unity of the human race and the peace of all mankind. So these spiritual energies have been released and are causing everything, including the havoc that we see around us. We'll talk a little bit more in a couple of minutes about why that is, because it may not at first blush seem to make a lot of sense. So the second way in which religion influences our move towards our destination of peace, which Baha'is believe is inevitable. Religion provides the motivating power and the implementing influence to achieve peace. So the son of the Prophet, founder of the Baha'i faith, the son's name was Abdul-Baha, and he was also the first authorized interpreter of the Baha'i Writings, says that today the benefits of universal peace are recognized amongst the people. Now, he was saying this before 1921. Already back then, he's saying that the benefits of universal peace are recognized. And today we also, so many people want peace, and the benefits, as we look at what's happening in the Middle East, as we look at what's been happening in Ukraine and Russia, in Darfur, in Myanmar, in China, in Sudan, in the Congo, you look at, honestly, every corner of the world right now is troubled by one kind of conflict or the other. Syria, Iraq, Yemen, etc., etc., etc. So benefits of peace are recognized. And likewise, he says, the harmful effects of war are clear and manifest to all. So then what's the problem if we know all of this stuff? And he responds, he says, but in this matter, so in the matter of establishing peace, knowledge alone is far from sufficient. A power of implementation is needed to establish it throughout the world. And then he goes on to say that this power of implementation is the penetrating influence of the Word of God and the confirmations of the Holy Spirit. So once again, we're being directed, if we want solutions, to go to the divine revelations, especially the most recent one, which is the divine physician prescribing the remedy for our ills today. No point applying the flu medicine that we needed 2,000 years ago to a case of fourth stage, cancer of the colon, which we may have today, or leukemia, because that remedy is just not fit for purpose for the disease today. Now, the third thing that religion does is it helps us reframe our understanding of what is happening in constructive ways so we don't lose hope. And this is the reason why. It's because the teachings of Baha'u'llah reframe and reinterpret or interpret what's happening in the world in a way that makes us feel like, okay, we understand why this is happening, and now we understand what our job is, and we're just going to get on with it. This is why, if you've hung around Baha'is, you will see that we're very optimistic, and we tend not to feel confused about what's going on. We may be dismayed, we feel the pain and the suffering, but we're not confused. So this is a quote from Shoghi Effendi, who is the second authorized interpreter of the Baha'i Writings, also known as the guardian of the Baha'i faith. And he says this to the Baha'is. This is a reminder to us, because we all need reminders. So I'm sharing it with you so that we all remember. He says, all humanity is disturbed and suffering and confused. We cannot expect to not be disturbed. I mean, when we see the images on our televisions these days, we're disturbed. And we can't expect not to suffer. So, you know, if we're located in those lands where these things are happening, or when we watch and feel the pain of others, we also suffer alongside them. But he says we don't have to be confused. I was having coffee with somebody who said she would be here tonight. I don't know if she is. I'm not going to name you, but she was telling me a couple of days ago that she's been engaging with different spiritual communities on the West Coast. And one of the things she's noticed that everybody seems very confused about what's going on. And she said, you Baha'is seem to be the only group that I associate with that's not confused. And I thought that was interesting, because it brought to mind this quotation from Shoghi Effendi. So let's look at some of the ways in which the Baha'i writings, the divine revelation for today, change the lens through which we understand what's going on, just so you get a sense, because it's you'll find some really interesting things. So the first interpretation is that all of humanity's tribulations, starting with the First World War, onto the Second World War and the Cold War, and now all the conflicts and wars and genocides and climate change and everything we see, is happening because it is an act of both punishment by the Creator and an act of purification. So I'm going to read the quote so you see that I'm not making stuff up. This judgment of God is both a retributory calamity. In the West, we don't like to think in terms of retribution and punishment, right? But this is our Creator. It's not you and me doing this. It's not some other random dude or individual. So it's both a retributory calamity and an act of holy and supreme discipline. Now, in case we didn't understand this and thought, well, surely he didn't mean retributory calamity, he then says it in using different words that mean the same thing. It is at once a visitation from God. If you look up the word visitation in the dictionary, it's punishment, and a cleansing process for all mankind. And then here's the explanation. Mankind is being simultaneously called upon to give account of its past actions, and on the other hand, is being purged and prepared for its future mission. It can neither escape the responsibilities of the past nor shirk those of the future. So this is the act of a loving parent. Let's unpack this. So what exactly is humanity being punished for? What is it being called to give account for? What past actions are we talking about? Again, the writings of Baha'u'llah and their volumes of them just on this subject are very clear. I don't know if many of you know, but when Baha'u'llah came, one of the things he did while still a prisoner in exile was that he wrote letters to all the secular kings and rulers of his time, and all the ecclesiastical leaders, so all the divines, including Pope Pius IX and the head of the caliphate, and all the heads of the monarchies that essentially governed 85% of the world. Shahnaz, could you mute your, thank you. So the Hohenzollerns, the Napoleon's empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Romanov Empire in Russia. He addressed Queen Victoria, the entire British Empire. He addressed the rulers of the Americas, and then he addressed the Shah of Iran and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Persian empires, and Ottoman empires. And he wrote to them, and to some of them, he wrote multiple letters. And in them, he calls all of these leaders and says, I have come, the person you've been waiting for, the promised one of all ages has come. And it's time for you to heed the voice of God, which includes treating your subjects with justice. He says, be careful of the way you're treating the poor, treat them with equity, treat their God's trust in your midst, turn away from your materialistic pursuits, give up all this pomp and pageantry and turn towards service, and on and on and on. I mean, there were entire letters written to them, and they're contained in there's a wonderful volume called Summons of the Lord of Hosts that has compiled all of these. And they basically either ignored or rejected his message. Now, the Baha'i writings tell us that had the leaders and the divines of the time, because of the hold that they held, the sway they held over 85% of the people of the world, had they listened to the call of Baha'u'llah, within 2 years, we would have had peace on earth. So thy kingdom come, thy will be done, that we could already have been living that. But because of their failure to do so, Baha'u'llah tells them, now that you've rejected the most great peace, be content with the lesser peace. And he tells them that the path towards the lesser peace is going to be tortuous, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be filled with setbacks and reverses. And essentially this punishment is essentially it's a cause and effect thing. It is the consequence of humanity having failed through its leaders to recognize and heed the call of Baha'u'llah. As a result of this failure, Baha'u'llah also told all of he announces that because of your failure to heed my call, I have removed, power has been taken away from the kings, from two categories, kings and the ecclesiastics. And when you trace history, it's a project I've been doing recently. It's really fascinating. When you take each of the letters, you read them, you look at the date in which they were written, then you look at what was happening historically at the time. And Baha'u'llah prophesies the fall of a whole number of them. And he warns them, and he says, if you follow me, you can have, to Napoleon, he says, you will be able to rule over basically the entire earth. But if you don't, your entire empire is going to pass away from you. And this is at a time when Napoleon III was sitting pretty. He was at the height of his glory. So for somebody to say to him very shortly, you're going to lose everything, seemed laughable, right? And this happens over and over again. So this is the punishment part. Now, what is humanity being purged and prepared for? Again, the writings are very clear on that. They state that this loving creator of ours, this loving parent, is not willing to sit back and let his or her children, humanity, squander their birthright, which is to attain the stage of peace and unity, towards which we have been working for millennia. So this is that path that we said our whole purpose is, universal peace is the destination towards which humanity has been moving from the start. He's not going to let us do this to ourselves. So think about it. For those of you who are parents, especially parents of kids who are older, we all remember times as we raise our kids when we had to exercise some pretty tough love as we saw them making choices that we knew might lead to deep regret. And there's some choices you just don't come back from. Some choices you kind of muddle your way through, and there are other choices where, as Abdu'l-Baha says, he says, when you see a child or taking a cup of cyanide and about to drink it, you don't say, "Oh, sweetheart, don't put it down. Oh, you're so cute." No, you knock the cup out of the child's hand, right? You have to take action and stop that disaster from happening. Okay, so the second lens that the Baha'i writings give us is that when suffering happens because of the choices we've made, so this isn't suffering that God says, I'm going to inflict on you, but because of bad choices we're making, we have created these situations of suffering. But once we're suffering has certain opportunities inherent in it. And I find these fascinating. I want to read to you a quotation that actually embodies a bunch of these. He says, "Adversity will be prolonged." So think about what's going on today: climate change, nuclear proliferation, terrorism, wars, genocides, human trafficking, on and on and on, fill in the blanks, right? Economic travails, global food crisis, a global energy crisis, a global water crisis. So the writings of the faith, Baha'u'llah was talking about this stuff back in the 1860s. So he could see what was coming, because this is seeing through the eye of God. This isn't just some mere human being like you and I. So here's what the Baha'i writings say: adversity, which is what we're going through, will be prolonged. So let's buckle up. It will be worldwide. We're definitely seeing that. I mean, just climate change alone is going to decimate everyone everywhere. Allied to chaos and universal destruction. Those are pretty strong words. But now, what will it do? What will this suffering do? We had COVID. We were hoping it would do some of these things, and it scratched the surface, but we clearly are very hard-headed, and we're going to need more suffering to wake us up. It will, first of all, stir the conscience of the world. Now, we're starting to see evidences of that. It's exciting. You see all these protests. We saw it during COVID with the Black Lives Matter movement. We're seeing it now, people clamoring for peace, people talking about the fact that we should stop inflicting injury on women and children and innocents, and yet recognizing that there are lots of other things that are also wrong that we need to fix. Suffering will also disillusion the masses. I love that. That is so true. The masses are certainly disillusioned. It will precipitate a radical change in the very conception of society. Now we're talking. Once we get to the point where we're willing to reconceive radically, not just tinkering on the side, which is why, for instance, when friends of mine are involved in United Nations reform and they think this is going to solve the problems, I really don't believe, despite all the wonderful intentions, we're way past that. We're way past tinkering at the edge of reform. There has to be a radical change in the very conception of society. So that what? So that the stirring of the conscience, the disillusionment of the masses, and this radical change in our conception of society will ultimately act like a welding machine. It will heat. It's like putting iron on the fire. It softens and melts the iron. This hard, cold, dark iron takes on the qualities of the fire and becomes malleable and red and warm and capable of being flexible and molding itself to the needs of the age. And the image is that it will coalesce ultimately the disjointed, the bleeding limbs of mankind. That's what we are. You look at Israel and Gaza, and you look at Ukraine and Russia and Sudan and Darfur and so on, and you see these bleeding limbs of mankind that need to be fused into one body, singly, organically united and indivisible. So again, the goal is unity. The last thing that suffering does is it will So this is the quote. It says, nothing but a fiery ordeal, which is what we're in the middle of right now, out of which humanity will emerge chastened. So chastened means once you've been punished, you come out and you say, okay, I'm sorry, I recognize the mistake I made, right? So chastened and prepared can succeed in implanting that sense of responsibility which the leaders of a newborn age must arise to shoulder. Our leaders have failed us, guys, clear as day, our global leaders, right? And so we need to have a new kind of leader that has the sense of responsibility that is needed to take the right kinds of decisions so that we won't enter into these blood-curdling, bloody wars and strifes and problems, and can take the decisions with respect to climate change, for instance, so that we can truly mitigate global warming quickly. Now, apropos of the United States in particular, for those of us who live in the US, I want to share this with you. Because some of us forget. Some of us sometimes forget, first of all, that as Baha'is, we're not allowed, we're strictly forbidden from engaging in partisan politics. But some of us internally, even though we may not speak about it, worry about, oh, who's going to get elected here? Who's going to get elected there? Oh dear, how could this happen? How could that happen? So to put all these thoughts, because these thoughts just dissipate our energies, right? So I just wanted to share this quote with you from Shori Effendi. He says, the woes and tribulations which threaten it, he had been referring to the American nation, are partly avoidable, but mostly inevitable and God sent. And you'd think, well, why on earth would God send these woes? And I haven't put up the rest of the quote, but here it is. I'm going to read it to you. The purpose of these woes and tribulations is to purge a government and people, so that's us, clinging tenaciously to the obsolescent doctrine of absolute sovereignty and upholding a political system manifestly, in other words, clearly at variance with the needs of a world already contracted into a neighborhood and crying for unity. So to purge the government and us of what? Of its anachronistic conceptions. So these are outworn, old, primitive conceptions, and prepare it to play a preponderating role, a primary role, a chief role in hoisting the standard of the lesser peace, in the unification of mankind, and in the establishment of a world federal government on this planet. This is the promise and the hope in the Baha'i Writings for America. This is our true destiny. It's a spiritual destiny. In fact, Abdul Baha says he hopes that America will lead all nations spiritually, not materially, not economically, not militarily, but spiritually. So think about the road we need to traverse when we look at where we are now, which is really not in a good place. When we look at all the corruption and we look at racism and all the entrenched prejudices and the polarization, we have a lot of work to do to clean up our own backyard so that we are ready not only to be peacemakers within, but to hoist the standard of peace for the whole world, right? So a lot of work to be done. And these trials and tribulations that we are going through and will continue to go through as a nation are there next time you want to complain about something that's going wrong in this country. Just remember that this is all for a good purpose. That sometimes we've got to slam our heads against the wall a few times before we decide it hurts too much and maybe we want to do something different. Okay, now here's another thing that the Baha'i teachings offer. They actually offer tangible plans of action or blueprints for peace, a blueprint for peace. And today I want to approach this from two angles. There's a lot, but I want to give you a holistic view. Usually I talk about just one aspect of it, but tonight I decided that we need to all, primarily myself, because I benefit more from these presentations than anyone, because I get to dive into the Baha'i writings and think about correlating them with what's going on in the world. So Baha'u'llah says that the purpose of all religion is to bring about a transformation in humanity that is both internal and external. So changes you and me, our internal characters, but also changes society. So it brings about peace and conduces to a better world. So as a result, when you read the Baha'i writings, you will see that there is a twofold approach to peace. There's a two-pronged approach to establishing lasting peace. The first prong has to do with this radical reconceptualization of the way we want to organize or reorder society. These are all phrases you will see often in the Baha'i writings. To reorder the world, to reorganize the world, to reorganize society. Why? So it's fit for purpose for this age, for 21st century and beyond. So that's the first prong, and we're going to unpack that. And the second prong is transformation of our hearts. So you've got coming at it from the societal level, and you've got coming at it from changing hearts and minds, right? At the individual grassroots level. So let's look at the reordering of and restructuring of society. That's the first prong. In this letter that I told you about from the Governing Council of the Baha'i Faith in 2019, they say a global order that unifies the nations with the assent of humanity. That means everybody needs to agree. All the nations need to be agreed to this, have agreed to this global order. This shape that it takes is going to be a decision of the nations. So a global order that unifies the nations with the assent of humanity is the only adequate answer to the destabilizing forces that threaten the world. And they said this before the war in Ukraine broke out, before this current October war in the Middle East, right, in the Holy Land. So another quotation, this process of the lesser peace towards which humanity is moving in fits and starts will no doubt witness tests and setbacks, as well as great advances. So the way I conceive of it when I read the Baha'i writings is that it's like we take a giant leap 5 steps forward, but then we slide painfully back 4 steps. So sometimes it doesn't feel like we're making much progress, even though we are. And they say it will certainly include a development of historic importance that still hasn't happened. So this is something I'm looking out for. This is something I'm working assiduously to try and help bring about. What is this historic point? The point at which the majority of the world's nation states formally commit themselves to a global order. Here we go again, that phrase, global order, comprising institutions and laws, and equipped with the means by which collective decisions can be enforced. And then they say, we can't tell exactly when this will happen or exactly the steps we'll go through to get there, but this will happen. This is something that the Baha'is believe. Now let's look at the reality. So here we are, stuck in 2 crazy wars that have brought humanity to the brink of global disaster. I was just attending a talk in DC by somebody who's an expert on nuclear proliferation or non-proliferation. He's been doing this for decades. And he said, and I agree with him based on everything I've read just as an individual, that today the threat of nuclear war is at the highest it's been since 1962. But unfortunately, people aren't talking about it. So the threat is high. Can you imagine a world in which we have nuclear war, even if it's a limited nuclear war, which would result in 10 years of basically a nuclear winter, no crops, no sun, no crops, 2 billion people dying. Those are the estimates. Combined with climate change, which is already proving to be disastrous. And the question is it going to be catastrophic? Depends on our actions. So we've been trying for decades to get a system in place just on the war part to avoid these crazy wars. So the war in Ukraine, as I said before, spawned some global crises, a global food crisis, a global energy crisis, the threat of nuclear war, the world dividing into blocks. This is the kind of blocks we had before the First World War, where nations are arrayed on one side against the other. We're very close, and a huge escalation in arms production and arms race. And as Abdu'l-Baha said when he visited the United States in 1912, he said, if you have these many weapons, you're going to use them. It's impossible to amass so many weapons and not be tempted to use them or accidentally use them. So we've been trying. So what stopped us from creating a system of collective security, global collective security that works? We have had, over the course of the last century, at least 3 opportunities to create such a system. The first was after the First World War, when, thanks to Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, he came up with the idea of disarmament, that all nations, and this is one of the principles that Baha'u'llah brought in the 1860s. So this is Woodrow Wilson now talking in 1918. So 50 years after Baha'u'llah had brought the principle, Woodrow Wilson says in his 14 points that we need to arrange things within the League of Nations so that every nation will only have the amount of arms necessary to maintain order within its borders, and the rest destroyed. It was a wonderful idea, but humanity wasn't ready to take that step and actually do it. But at least the idea was floated and it was seriously entertained. The idea of collective security was also actually included in the Charter of the League of Nations. And the idea was, one for all and all for one. And if one nation was an aggressor and disturbed the peace, that the others would sanction it. Unfortunately, we didn't have the gumption, we didn't have the courage to actually implement these wonderful ideas. So that was the first missed opportunity. Then we had a Second World War, which Woodrow Wilson, by the way, predicted. He said, if we don't do these things within a generation, we will have a Second World War. And we did. And after the Second World War, we tried again with the United Nations. And we incorporated certain provisions in the Charter, including the provisions for standing force. So Baha'u'llah's vision of collective security, in short, is that all nations possess only the amount of arms necessary to maintain peace within their borders, destroy the rest under international supervision, and all nations agree that if one nation disturbs the peace of the world, all the nations arise against it and bring it to heel, using an international standing force to which all nations contribute, and that acts in accordance with laws that have been determined, again, collectively in advance. Not like the way we're doing it now, where it's fuzzy policy, there's no unified system, it's done through cobbling together coalitions of states, and it's usually an us against them. So, and then we had the Cold War. And after the Cold War, again, things started to unravel, even though for a while we were moving towards increased international collaboration and cooperation. And there was, around the year 2000, 2005, tremendous hope that humanity had turned a corner. But it reminds us of what Abdu'l-Baha said, that the knowledge of peace, the need for peace, is not enough. What is required is an implementing power, right? And we're seeing this as we look at our history. Now, the Governing Council of the Baha'i Faith in their 2019 letter says that the reason why humanity failed to actually take a decisive step towards peace each of these 3 times in the last century was because of certain inherent weaknesses, certain bad habits that we had. This is the slide, on collective security, which, by the way, is a tangible expression of the principle of justice. If you think about it, if we could have stepped in and avoided the war, in the Holy Land and in Ukraine, think of the justice that would have been implemented. All these poor innocent people would not be suffering the way they are. Okay, so certain weaknesses have hindered us. They are what got in the way of us taking the decisive steps towards collective security and achieving peace. And I listed three of them. The Universal House of Justice, the Governing Council, lists a whole bunch, but this is a short presentation. I'm not going to go into all of them. I wanted to kind of hone in on a couple of things. One is nationalism. The other is prejudices of all kinds, ethnic prejudices, racial prejudices, prejudices of gender and sex, prejudices of wealth, disparity of rich and poor, and so on. Okay. Now, the second thing, blueprint, part of the blueprint for social organization and restructuring of the world, is another revolutionary idea. I want you to note that the idea of collective security, a global system of collective security, is a revolutionary concept that Baha'u'llah brought. Humanity did not think about creating a system of collective security until we had gone through a First World War. And then Woodrow Wilson comes up with the idea in 1918. So 1863, 1918, you see the difference. If people had heeded Baha'u'llah's call, this Persian nobleman from Iran calling the rulers and leaders of the world to establish a system of collective security in the 1860s, we would never have had a First World War or a Second World War. So it's a truly revolutionary concept. The other revolutionary concept that Baha'u'llah brought, again, think of it, a Persian nobleman. I mean, you think about Iran today and, you think, do such ideas come from Iran? Well, no, it's not the country. Again, this is the voice of God for today, right? Happened to come through a Persian nobleman from Iran. But the second revolutionary concept is a world system of democratically elected federated nation states. Is the key to resolving our global crises. And the creation of such an entity is a tangible expression of the principle of oneness. So just very briefly, all it means is, just as in the United States, we have 50 states, but we are all under the umbrella of a central federal government. Now imagine taking 193 nations and making them all nation states, each a federated unit within a global federation with a global federal government that has the authority and responsibility to act in areas that only narrow sphere where the collective interests of humanity absolutely demand and require that we act collectively. So climate change to me is a good example. No one nation, no 5 nations, no 20 nations, no 40 nations can solve climate change. We all have to be part of the decision-making. We all have to come to agreement on binding laws and steps we're going to take, and then everybody has to do it, and people have to be held to account. There has to be a system of enforcement and accountability. And in fact, when Abdu'l-Baha visited the United States in 1912, a high official of the US government asked him, said, I want to be of service to my government and my country. What do you recommend I do? And Abdu'l-Baha says the best way you can serve both your people, your country, and the world is by exporting the principles of federalism underlying your form of government to the world, because the world needs these principles of federalism at a global level in order to achieve unity. Now, the same weaknesses that have held us back from creating a global system of collective security have also stopped us from creating a world federation of nation states. By the way, the famous 20th century historian Arnold Toynbee predicted in the 1970s that humanity would, he said, we're very allergic to the idea of a global governance. But he says the good news is this allergic reaction is just a bad habit. And when humanity is faced with an existential term, it will get rid of this allergy overnight, and it will turn on a dime, and albeit unhappily, kicking and screaming, it will reach to a form of global governance, which is what the Universal House of Justice has been talking about, the fact that the only solution is the achieving this a formal order by the assent of all of humanity that comprises institutions and laws with a system to back it up and enforce it. This is exactly the same thing. Now, what is the antidote to these weaknesses of nationalism and identity crisis? So the two I want to focus on. The antidote is applying the principle of oneness, becoming aware of the oneness of humanity and of nations, and then making this principle operational in all aspects of international life. In this 2019 letter, the Universal House of Justice says nothing short of an unreserved acceptance of the oneness of humankind will get us to where we need to get. So an analogy that has always helped me in this regard is this. You know, in the physical world, there are certain laws, and we're all happy to accept that they exist. So the law of gravity, if I bring a glass and put it at the edge of the table, I know that if I let go, gravity will pull it. Now, I could, because I'm human and we tend to be arrogant, say, well, I choose not to believe in the law of gravity. Well, sure, I could do that. I'm entitled to it. But if I wanted to build an airplane, I'd be foolish not to take into account the law of gravity, right? It wouldn't end so well. Similarly, in the social and spiritual spheres, there are certain social laws and spiritual laws, one being the law of the oneness of humanity. And if we build social institutions and economic and political and environmental and religious institutions that fail to take this spiritual and social law into account, they will fail. So we don't have to wonder why this process of disintegration is taking place with such alarming acceleration. It's because we forgot in building this airplane to take into account this fundamental law. So no big surprise. And this old way of being needs to pass away for a new way of being, this radical reconceptualization and restructuring of society to take place. Now, acceptance of the principle of oneness will also help us overcome another weakness that the Universal House of Justice identifies. So nationalism was what has held us back from creating a system of collective security and from creating a federation, a global federation of nation states. The other really critical weakness, one of many, but really important one, especially today, given everything that's going on, is what this governing council calls a crisis of identity. So, and they speak about this crisis of identity as falling into competing ideologies and power struggles, that we seem to be engaging in seemingly countless permutations of us and them, us and them. You know, I don't know, I'm Israeli, I'm Palestinian, you're Israeli, I'm Jewish, you're, I don't know, Muslim, I'm Christian, you're this, I'm this ethnicity, you're that ethnicity. With the Rohingyas, we're Buddhists, you're Muslims. With the Uyghurs, you know, we're Christians, you're Muslims. With the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis, same story. With the people in Darfur, it's the Arabs, the people from Arab origin versus those from Black African origin, and on and on. You human beings were so creative in creating situations where we can make ourselves feel better, not by uplifting ourselves, but by pulling somebody else down or some other people down, just to make us feel superior. It's really sad, and it's really time to grow up and let go of this really bad habit. The House of Justice says we delude ourselves with our rival conceptions about the primacy of a particular people. My people is, you know, more important than some other people. And they say we peddle these false assumptions, and by peddling them, we obscure the truth that humanity is on a common journey in which all are protagonists. This is the bottom line. When we recognize we're all one, we recognize that we are all created by the same creator. We're all equally loved by that creator. Our differences are superficial and simply redound to the beauty of the human race, like flowers in the garden, being different and variegated. But our reality, which is a spiritual reality, is the same. And we have the same hopes and the fears and same desires. A Palestinian child is the same as an Israeli child, which is the same as a Ukrainian child or a Darfurian child or a Russian child. And everybody has the same hopes and dreams, and everybody is entitled to live a life of dignity and nobility and hope and contribution to the betterment of the world, because that's what we've all been placed on planet Earth to do. To do what? Two things we said: better the world and to live in concord and harmony. So that is what we're here to do. Now, so these are the quotes. These are really important quotes from this letter. The other thing the House of Justice says we need to do, it's really the solution to overcoming the crisis of identity, is to create a vision of our shared identity and common purpose. So this is something, imagine if a bunch of our leaders got together. That's why I said we need to have leaders fit for purpose. If we had a bunch of our leaders who got together and sat down and had this consultation. Let's talk about our shared identity and common purpose. Wow. They would inevitably get to the point that in order to achieve our common purpose and to uphold our shared identity, we need a peaceful world. And very quickly, the question would be, what do we need to do around the world to achieve peace? And they would quickly arrive at the inevitability of creating a system of collective security as a first step. It is the cornerstone foundation of peace, according to Baha'u'llah. Without it, we're not going to achieve peace. So that's where we need to begin. Okay. Now, another antidote is the principle of justice. I'm not going to get into it in detail. Suffice it to say that the Baha'i writings say that justice is the only basis and the permanent foundation of the most great peace. When you look again at the wars and strifes, you can see that if we don't create just systems, these wars are going to go on eternally. We're not going to solve them. As soon as somebody gains enough strength in the upper hand, they will go and stab the other in the back. And we know that blood does not clean blood. So this is a crazy spiral that we've been in, and with this merry-go-round, round and round. Aren't we tired of doing the same things over and over? It's not working. Now, in order to accept these principles of oneness and justice, which we said are the remedy or the antidote to our weaknesses of nationalism and the crisis of identity, we need world leaders to do what? The Universal House of Justice says we're all waiting for a historic feat of statesmanship. We're waiting. It's not happening. Our leaders aren't there yet. But you know what? Shame on us. It's not actually their fault. This is me talking now. It's our fault. If we allow people to rule over us and lead us, people who are corrupt, people who are out for their own self-interest, people who are willing to lie, people who are unfaithful, people who stir up prejudice, and on and on and on, then we deserve what we get. It's pure and simple. The onus is on us to grow up and learn to elect fit leaders, obviously in those places where at least we still can elect. Now, the last thing I want to say is this. You know, we said there were two approaches to peace. One was this collective institutional approach, about which we talked quite a bit. The second prong is transforming the hearts. In this letter again of the Universal House of Justice, they say the Baha'is are working towards a peace which does not merely rule out armed conflict, but a collective state of being that manifests unity. And what this requires is that we foster unity by nurturing in every heart a selfless love for humankind, so that we can then harmonize the different elements. Now, how do we do this? I come to the final point. The Baha'i community around the world has been dedicated now for over a couple of decades to experiments, basically, in how to build a better world by engaging in 3 areas of action according to the Universal House of Justice. And I want to say this also for the Baha'is in this group. The Universal House of Justice, both in 2020 and 2021, said that we have to be engaged in all 3, and these are their words, these 3 simultaneous, overlapping, and coherent areas of action. And what are they? I'm going to read you the quotation directly from the Universal House of Justice, because sometimes we amongst ourselves, we debate, and we like all human beings, we like to do one thing and just stick to one thing. But the center of the covenant of the Baha'is is saying this. The friends, it's a word for the Baha'is, are called to 3 simultaneous, overlapping, and coherent areas of action, meaning now we're going to explain to you what they are. Community building efforts, number 1. They involve a whole bunch of wonderful activities in which we train children in moral education and to have spiritual grounding, and which we trained young youth to be outward oriented and focused on service, and to channel their wonderful energies in service to community, in which we connect with the Word of God, in which we basically build communities free of prejudice, in which we're free of racism, free of sexism. We have a system of elections that is unique. This is all part of the first one, community building efforts. Where did I get my examples from? From this letter of the Universal House of Justice. I'm not just making stuff up off the top of my head. Semicolon. After community building efforts in clusters, kind of groupings, geographical groupings, the next is projects and activities for social action. In another letter, they talk about this social action being learning how to bring about combined material and spiritual progress in any community, because we need to progress on both fronts, right? So social and economic development projects, social action. This is the second of the 3 simultaneous, overlapping, and coherent areas of action. And the third, they say, so semicolon, and involvement in the discourses of society, which they say are there to, by engaging in discourses of society, we help shape those discourses, shape them to decide how do we want to build a better community and what kinds of social action do we want to, to have. You can't figure out your social action without having public discourse about what's needed. So we need to get out of the mindset that we only do one, that we only do building communities. And I want to end with this other statement from the Universal House of Justice in a December 2021 letter. Apropos, and they repeat these 3 things. I mean, it's just, we need to start reading carefully. They say, seen from one perspective, they, meaning these 3 areas, are quite distinct, each having its own characteristics and imperatives, yet they all underline, represent ways of awakening the energies latent in the human soul and channeling them towards the betterment of society, which we said right at the start was one of the purposes for which human beings were created, the betterment of society and the creation of peace. And here's the clincher. Together, these three areas of action are the means of releasing what Shoghi Effendi described as the society building power of the faith. So, dear friends, building communities is not the way solely for releasing the society building power of the faith. All three words of the universal laws of justice together, they are the means of releasing the society building power of the faith. So this is beautiful, because one of the things that has always attracted me to the Baha'i faith is that it is so balanced and so undogmatic and so unfanatical, and allows for action in all different ways that all come together, directed at the soul, at a sole purpose. And so I invite those of you who are not familiar with Baha'i community life to come and see how we're engaging in all these three. We don't claim to have gotten it right. We're still experimenting, and we welcome standing shoulder to shoulder with others who are also well-wishers of humanity and who want to work with us. The last quote that I'm going to throw at you is a challenge. It's also from the Baha'i Writings. To disregard the Baha'i solution for peace is to build on foundations of sand. Now, I do want to give this some context, and I've provided it at the bottom. It doesn't mean that we repudiate other solutions, but it is an acknowledgement of, quote, and that's why I put this in quotes, their inadequacy compared to the divine plan. Why? Because it's divine. It's not man-made. All the other plans are philosophers or groups of people or NGOs or 2 or 3 government leaders, but they cannot compare with a plan given to us by the Creator for the unification of the world. And the last line of this quote that's not here is, we cannot escape the truth that nothing mundane, that means of this world, can in the last resort be enduring unless supported and sustained through the power of God. And this is the influence that we talked about of the Word of God. So that's it, folks. If you want more information, Shekupe already mentioned that there are a couple of books you might be interested in that go into more detail: The Alchemy of Peace and Building a World Federation, The Key to Resolving Our Global Crises, both available on Amazon in digital and softback. So I will now find the button for stopping to share, and we can have a conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was beautiful, detailed, and clear. And you know, the last quotation that other resolution to bring peace is like building peace on sand. I think that we can see the result right now. The chaotic results that we see all around the world. Nothing so far has worked. So I think that we are witnessing right now. So thank you so much. It was absolutely informative, beautiful, at the same time challenging. Absolutely.
That's the idea.
Yes, absolutely.
We all need to get out of our comfort zones.
Yes, yes. So friends, please go ahead, give your comments, your questions, your arguments. We are here to talk about it. And you know, this topic is it really needs our attention. And if you have anything, you know, to talk about any solution, any argument, please go ahead. We are all here to listen to one another, please.
Obviously, there was you presented a lot of ideas, a lot of challenges, and certainly at a time now when there is the chaos, having activity that looks like it's not directly addressing today's challenge, right? But building towards the future is difficult to sustain internally, and I think difficult for people to understand externally, who say, what you talk about unity, but look at what's going on. How are you going to get to unity when the chaos is occurring and the conflict?
You're so right, and that's why really our refuge is, for me, the refuge is going into the writings. They're the only way I can understand and make sense, and I mean, to the extent, to the limited extent I can, given my limitations. Baha'u'llah says that one of the things that humanity is doing is that we're constantly trying to tackle the symptoms of the disease, but we're not going to the root cause. And he says, everybody says, first, let's fix this problem and that problem and that problem and that problem. And once we fix them, then we'll think about unity. And he says, you've got it all backwards. And that's why, and we've been trying it for hundreds of years. I mean, this isn't something new, right? So he says that you start by creating unity, and he says, and then you will find that all these other symptoms fall away. This is something the Baha'is fervently believe. And the Guardian says that in talking to our friends, we need to be very forthright with them and say, the reason all this stuff is happening is because we're not focusing on building unity. So the idea of raising children who are free of prejudice, that's a big deal. So 20 years from now, those kids won't be looking at each other saying, you're of this ethnic origin, I'm of that ethnic, you this religion, that religion, this piece of land, that piece of land. Abdullah says the craziness of fighting over land, when you die, all you need is a tiny piece of earth in which to bury your bones. He said only human beings are stupid enough and crazy enough to engage in this business of this is my land, this is your land. At one planet Earth, there's limited amount of land. We all need to learn to live on it. And we all need to learn to view each other as one. I grew up in Israel, in the Holy Land. And I went to school with Palestinians. So I went to a Palestinian and to an Arab school, and I lived in a Jewish neighborhood. And when my mother and I would come home every night, walk into the apartment building, the Palestinian kids would be arrayed on one side and the Israeli kids on the other side. And they would be throwing shoes over our heads, shouting, pick a side, whose side are you? If you believe in justice, it's weaponizing the word justice. Both sides did this. Then you will choose us because look how unjust the others are. And depending on how far back in history you go, you can always find something that somebody else did to you that was unjust, right? I've just been reading about Azerbaijan and Armenia. I mean, shame on me that I didn't know enough. But this business of displacing large numbers of people, this has been happening for a long time in today's world. So in the 1990s, Armenia goes into Azerbaijan. You should actually take out a world map and look. I did it for the first time, as I said, shame on me. Azerbaijan, and then the Armenians go in and they take out like a big donut hole, massive, Nagorno-Karabakh, and they create an Armenian enclave. So Christian Armenians take a bite out of Muslim Azerbaijan. And do you know how many people they displaced like that? 700,000 Azerbaijanis had to leave. 4 weeks ago, they realized people weren't paying attention. The Azerbaijanis thought, "Ooh, Armenia is weak right now. We can go back in and regain our territory." They move out 100,000 Armenians. It's just like nothing. The Rohingya Muslims being pushed out of Myanmar. 750,000 to 1 million of them a few years ago into Bangladesh, 1 million to Bangladesh, and then just lately, a few days ago, another 700,000 over the border into Thailand. Where is the international community? Where are our leaders? And on and on and on. I mean, this is just so. This idea of pushing people this way and that, and displacing and overtaking and taking land and, you know, controlling, and we can't do, it's unsustainable, and it's clearly unsustainable. We just have to look at what's going on. See, it's unsustainable for everybody. Nobody comes out of this happy. So we all have to learn the only way is to be proactive, think long-term, and work towards the long term, because we know the house of cards is collapsing. So for us to engage in the short term is a dissipation of precious energies. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't, you know, if there's a sick or wounded child, we don't tend to them. And if there's somebody who's hungry and needs food, we don't also tend to them. That's part of, remember we said social action is part of what we do. It's one of the 3 lines of action. But we keep our eye on a much greater vision of the oneness of humanity. And yes, so in this same letter of the Universal House of Justice, the advice they give to Baha'is, because they know how you and I are feeling, Rob, and our friends. Here they say, a heart that has embraced love for the whole of humanity will certainly be pained when confronted by the suffering that so many endure because of disunity. This is before these wars even broke out. This is 2019, but they're prescient. But the friends of God, namely the Baha'is, cannot shut themselves off from the increasing turmoil of the society that surrounds them. They must guard themselves too, also, from becoming enmeshed in its conflicts or falling into its adversarial methods. That's what we have to avoid. Doesn't mean that we don't see, we don't acknowledge, we don't notice, we don't cry, our hearts don't bleed. It's that we don't let people suck us into the adversarial methods. No matter how bleak conditions may appear at any given time. This was before COVID too, by the way. No matter how dismal the immediate prospects for bringing about unity, which is what you're talking about, there is no cause for despair. The distressing state of the world can only spur us to redouble our commitment to constructive action. And in fact, there's a quote from Shoghi Effendi that I was reading earlier today, in which he says, the harder things get in the world, the Baha'is, he says, with every fresh blow, with every fresh adversity, the Baha'is must derive more hope and courage. Those are the 2 nouns he uses. Because we know that the time is coming. Why? Because the writings tell us that both processes are accelerating, disintegration, integration. So with every blow, with every adversity, we're moving towards the climax of both of these accelerating movements. And the apex is the creation of this new civilization, this new way of being. That's what gives us hope. This is just evidence of the fact that it's coming, it's coming. The child is being born. Whoa, the contractions are increasing. Yeah, the mother's going through hell because the contractions are painful and getting more frequent and more intense. But you know that as it reaches its apex, that is when this baby is going to be, this new civilization is going to be born. So that is the vision that we have. Those are the eyes through which we see. I don't know if that helps, but that's what keeps me going.
Thank you. Those are some great quotes.
Thank you, Sobeida. Other comments or questions, please?
Yeah, I'm going to have to move on, but I just wanted to say, Sobeida, thank you for such a succinct and comprehensive capsulization of the Baha'i message and the work that we have to do in addressing the issues of our time.
You're welcome.
Grateful.
Thanks for being here. Yeah.
All right. Good day.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, David. Bye. Other questions, please? Or comments? If not, I'm going to ask you, dear Sobeida, if you please give more examples of the two processes of integration and disintegration.
Oh, heavens. Well, so I think disintegration is, I think, fairly clear, right? Climate change, disintegration, poor choices that we're making, the loss of the loss of trust in public institutions and in our leaders. Another example of disintegration. The failure of our leaders to be able to come up with solutions, it seems, to anything from the sublime to the ridiculous, right? It's just everywhere. You look at countries that before we looked to as kind of solid countries, even in Western Europe, and everybody is struggling these days. Disintegration in terms of morals. We see the human trafficking in women and children. You see, of course, the wars, the genocides, the corruption, disintegration. I mean, just corruption alone spawns so many side effects. The fragmentation is part of disintegration. Every group of people thinks, so, you know, if we just break up from the larger group and have our own piece of land and take control of our own destinies, we'll be okay. And you look at what's happening. And in fact, I look at the world and I think, well, let's look at how well this has worked. So South Sudan seceded from Sudan because they thought that they'd be better off. But I've just been preparing for another talk, and it's like, you look at the statistics, they're worse off economically, there's less peace, people don't have money even though they're oil rich, they're hungry, drought has gotten worse, they don't have food, they don't have water. I mean, hello. You look at, you know, Eritrea and Ethiopia, you know, one broke off from the other. You look at the Catalans, and yet others still want to secede. The Catalans want to break off from Spain, and the people in the north of Italy want to break off from Italy. And it's like, look at the people who've already done this and look and see whether they're any better off. No, generally they are a lot worse off. Brexit, Britain moving away from divorcing from the EU. They are the worst off of the G7 countries, and they are they're economically in very, very bad shape. Their trade is in bad shape, so on and on and on. So disintegration, climate change, lots to talk about. Integration, we also see now, the integration unfortunately isn't as noticeable, partly because our media, God bless them, don't focus any attention on good news stories. So one of the examples of integration and ideas, let me give you one in the Holy Land that I read about. And I thought that the media would have picked it up. I was hoping that the cable news channels would have picked it up. So there's a community of people in Israel consisting of Palestinians and Israelis who decades ago decided that they wanted to come together and run an experiment. Yay for experiments. to demonstrate that it's possible for the two communities to live together in peace and harmony. So an equal number of families, I think there's 70 families in total, and so an equal number from both sides, half Palestinian, half Israeli, came together on a plot of land within the borders of what is now known as Israel. And they created this beautiful community, and they did everything together. They farmed together and they raised their children together. And the relationships and the bonds they created are just beautiful, beautiful bonds. So much so that when some of those children grew up and they left their little town, went into the larger world, they realized, oh, wow, we live in a very unfriendly society, regardless of where we've ended up. And some of them have come back to this place because they yearn for this kind of unity. So this kind of story, why isn't this being plastered on the news every single night to demonstrate what can be, right? Another example of integration, I think, are the movements of solidarity that we see amongst young people everywhere who are saying enough to war. Young people who are not even taking sides, who are saying we just want peace, or mothers even on both sides of these conflicts, Ukrainian and Russian mothers, and Palestinian and Jewish/Israeli mothers who are saying, you know, children are children. It really doesn't matter. And pictures of them hugging each other and giving solace to each other as they cry for the loss of each other's children and babies. The move towards reform of international institutions. Now, I already gave you my thoughts that I don't think that UN reform and the way it's taking shape right now, it's just not moving fast enough. I don't think we have the luxury of time. We don't have 100 years to do this. We will have destroyed ourselves several times over before then by climate change, nuclear weapons, and so on. So we need some other mechanism. But it's a sign that people are coming together to achieve unity and to find solutions. And a proliferation of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, nonprofit organizations working together to achieve peace. And these people work really hard. They don't get paid very much, but they work 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 15-hour days, and they're doing all the things that the Baha'is are doing too. Collaboration, cooperation, consultation. These are the tools we use. Bringing together diversity of voices, doing a lot of listening, and being creative and thinking outside the box. So all of these are examples. And finally, even at the leader level, so, you know, the Baha'i writings tell us, again, not to get into partisan politics. So none of us belong to any political parties, nor do we take sides in conflict. And yet a good idea is a good idea. And we're told not to speak ill of any politician and not to take sides. However, if somebody's done something good that is good for everybody, yes, of course, it's laudable. So I'm going to mention this world leader who came and spoke to the US Congress, Mr. Zelensky, not about the war in Ukraine. So it wasn't an us against them with respect to Ukraine and Russia. It was about this. He said, Security Council, you are falling down on the job of peace in the world, right? Your only job is to maintain peace, and you're clearly not able to do it. So you should not pick up your paychecks. You should all resign and go home, which is bravo to him. And he says, second point, the world clearly needs a mechanism to ensure peace. We can all agree with that. I don't think anybody on any side of any conflict would disagree with that. And then he gives a proposal, which I found fascinating because it was so similar to Baha'u'llah's principle of collective security and Woodrow Wilson's idea. He said, we need a U-24. We need a standing force called United for Peace, to which all the nations of the world contribute, whose job it is to maintain peace in the world. Again, this wasn't about Ukraine. This was about the world. So that whenever a conflict arises anywhere, so think Holy Land, think Sudan, think of all these conflicts, this United for Peace International Standing Force will go in within 24 hours. That's what the 24 stood for, and nip it in the bud. Now, that to me is part of this process of integration, coming up with ideas that are for the good of the collective whole and not just for the good of one country, not nationalistic, right?
Cafe, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Sobeida. Please, any more comments or questions? You're all welcome, please. Okay, it seems that...
Is the PowerPoint available? This is such a fantastic PowerPoint.
Yes, send me your email. I'd be happy to.
Sure.
So let me.
Should I put it on the chat? My email?
Yeah, yes, and I'm putting my email in. So you can either shoot me an email or do however you want.
Okay, sure.
I've just put it in. So.
Thank you, Sobeida. All right, dear friends. A big thank you to our dear Sobeida. It was just absolutely wonderful, informative, inspiring. And, you know, these conversations, we need to have more and more these days. It is a very difficult time for the whole world. The whole world is going through a time of suffering and confusion, and we really need to find solutions. So even in a small steps, it works. So this is part of the integration.
Yes, and public discourse. This is
public discourse, absolutely.
Talking to each other.
Yes.
Yes.
We need to continue these kind of conversations within us. The world is suffering, and we can, you know, find organic solutions from us, from individuals, from families, from communities. So thank you so much, everyone. You have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving, all of you. And with that, I'm going to pause the record.
Thanks very much to Sobeida Jan, and thanks so much to you, Shukufe Jun. Thank you very much.
Sure. My pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.